The future is looking bright for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Anthony Edwards has quickly become one of the best players in the league, and the supporting cast around him is deep, and it's still pretty young, and it's genuinely surprising to see a Timberwolves team this good and with so much future potential, because for most of the years I've watched the NBA, they've kind of been ass.
You know, they had a few good years where they had hope with Wiggins and Cat and like that Jimmy team. All that ended up not working out, but yeah, they are contenders for the foreseeable future, and let's see how they put this team together.
Before we start talking about how the Timberwolves built a championship contender, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on any new videos. So like we said in the intro, the Timberwolves were one of the worst teams in the entire NBA during the mid-2000s and like early 2010s and even into the late 2010s. I mean, they had that one year where they made the playoffs with Jimmy, but they were still an A seed. They quickly got bounced by the 2018 Rockets, and that was their only playoff appearance from 2005 to 2021. So what went wrong? First of all, they just didn't provide KG with enough help. And second, they were horrific at drafting, but we'll go over that here soon. First, the KG team. In 2004, they make the conference finals. KG had a decent supporting cast, not great, but you have Sam Cassell, Latrell Sprewell, Wally Zerbiak around him. It's pretty good. But then next season, you quickly regress. You completely miss the playoffs. Latrell Sprewell doesn't get the deal he wants, so he's like, you know what? And I'm retiring.
You know what's hilarious about that story is he said, like, I've got a family to feed when he was being offered $7 million a year. Unless you got like 80 cousins we don't know about, I think your family of like 5 or 6 can live off $7 million a year.
And that's back when a gallon of milk costs like $1.50.
Right,
like,
before Biden's America. Am I right?
And then Sam Cassell, they traded him to the Clippers in a horrific deal where they also sent out a first-round pick. So after making the conference finals in 2004, you go on to miss the playoffs entirely the next 3 seasons, and that's when they decided to ship off KG to Boston, and they didn't get back much for him.
Well, they got back, I think, like a record amount of players, but they didn't get back any good players. I mean,
right.
when the best player you get back is Al Jefferson. Al Jefferson is a solid 3rd best player on an 8th seed. Like, he can't be the best player you get back when you're trading out Kevin Garnett.
Yeah, and then that second part, they were maybe the worst drafting team during this era. The Sacramento Kings might have something to say about that, but they were really bad, and we're going to go over some of the worst here. 2006, they select Brandon Roy, future NBA All-Star, a guy whose career got cut short. Tragic for us to bring him up, but then you trade him immediately to the Blazers for Andy Foy. 2007, you take Corey Brewer. You could have took his teammate, Joakim Noah, who was a little bit better. 2008, we'll give him some credit. You acquire Kevin Love in a draft day deal. But then in 2009, 2 point guards over Steph Curry. How is that possible?
I mean, it's going to be a picture that lives in infamy forever for the Minnesota Timberwolves. You take Ricky Rubio, who people got to remember back in the day, Ricky Rubio had a lot of hype behind him. He was coming from Spain. He was seen as like maybe the next Steve Nash. He was praised for like his court vision, his passing ability, all that. And then the Johnny Flynn one, I mean, you're taking another point guard. Why not take a risk on the scrawny kid from Davidson?
I don't get it. Johnny Flynn was like 5'10", I swear.
And he averaged like 17 points a game at Syracuse. It's like, Lottie da, who cares?
But the awful picks wouldn't stop there. 2010, you take Wesley Johnson with the 4th pick. 1 pick later is DeMarcus Cousins. Also, Gordo and Paul George go later in the draft. 2011, you take Derek Williams. For some reason, I always just laugh thinking about him because dude was a bucket at Arizona.
Oh my God, the game against Duke in the NCAA tournament against Kyrie. Feasted on the Blue Devils.
I don't hate on them too much for that pick because that was a pretty bad draft. Like Kyrie went 1, and then you had like Kemba go later and Clay go later, Kawhi go later, but I'm not gonna like hate on them for not picking Kawhi at 15 when he was kind of just a no-namer out of San Diego State. And then in 2012, they just didn't have a pick because that Sam Cassell trade, the protections finally ran up. Like every year they kept hitting the protections because they were ass, but eventually you gotta pay up at some point.
The time has come for you to pay us.
Yeah, I mean, they missed out on Austin Rivers.
Yeah, so
who cares? And then in 2013, they drafted Trey Burke out of Michigan, traded him to Utah for Gorgie Jang and Shabazz Muhammad, another just mega hyped prospect, Shabazz Muhammad, who didn't pan out. And they could have had CJ or the crown jewel. They could have had Giannis like 6 picks later.
So now let's bring it to a draft they finally did well. They take Zach LaVine with the 13th pick in 2014. They were actually somewhat decent this season. Kevin Love had a good year, so they didn't have a super high pick. You take Zach LaVine, a good pick. Although it was hilarious, he got drafted and immediately said, me.
Well, I mean, you're going from UCLA, maybe one of like the most beautiful college campuses in the world, to Minnesota. No offense to Minnesota, Minneapolis, I'm sure is a lovely place, but it's cold.
It is.
And he's coming from sunny Los Angeles.
And then a month later, they trade Kevin Love. Shout out Kevin Love. I mean, he put in his shift for the Timberwolves, did what he could.
He tried. He got him a 40-win season when they had no business being that good.
Yeah, but they could just never build around him, and they pick up Andrew Wiggins, who was one of the most hyped prospects in the NBA at the time. Like in the past 10 years in the NBA, of course, who could forget the Maple Jordan nickname, the next LeBron.
Well, it was him and Shabazz Muhammad, the next LeBron and Kobe.
It didn't work out in the years to follow, but at the time, it looked like they were building a good young team because Andrew Wiggins was supposed to be the next NBA superstar.
But as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. In the 2015-16 season, they were in the early stages of construction because they won only 16 games, had the worst record in the league. Wiggins showed flashes, LaVine was pretty solid for a mid-first round pick, and KG even returned to the team at the very end of the season for the start of like a feel-good run. But they did win the 2015 draft and they selected Karl Anthony Towns out of Kentucky. In hindsight, it's an obvious no-brainer, but there was a lot of people at the time who were pounding the table for Jahlil Okafor.
And mainly it was Stephen A. Smith that wanted him so bad to go to the Knicks. Yeah, Jahlil Okafor had one really good season, but that was about it. And shout out to Cat. I mean, he's the longest tenured player on the Timberwolves. He stuck through it this entire rebuild when I wouldn't blame him numerous times for requesting a trade. And now it's paying dividends. So big shout out to Cat.
Dude's like if Joe Thomas's patience ever paid off.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't really pay off immediately though. They only won 29 games the next season, but that's still an improvement. Wiggins improved on his sophomore year, upped his scoring to 20.7 a night. Towns won Rookie of the Year, averaging 18.3 and 10.5. And LaVine gave you 14 off the bench, so they had a nice like young group of three players there. Kevin Garnett played his final season of his career with the team. It was really nice to see him with the Timberwolves to end it there. Also, shout out to KG. He never won a title there, but he always had love for Minnesota.
And shout out to that one fan who like took his shirt off all those years later. That was like dancing with his sons to welcome KG back to town.
That was incredible. During that offseason though, they pick up Tibbs to be their next head coach, and then they draft Chris Dunn with the 5th pick. I saw the vision. I liked Chris Dunn at Providence, but he was not good in the NBA, unfortunately. I mean, he crafted out like a nice, role player, defensive point guard type role, but never lived up to that 5th pick status.
To everyone on our Scoot video who was saying we were coping, first of all, you're partially right. But second of all, this is what a bad top 5 pick looks like.
Exactly.
Following year, the Wolves were ever so slightly better. They won 2 more games, but again, their players continued to show improvements. Cat had a great year, 25 points, 12 boards a game, started to take more threes, had some just monster games this year, 47 and 18 against the Knicks in February, 40 and 21 against the Lakers in April. Wiggins, he upped his scoring to 23 and a half a game, had a 47-point game against the Lakers in November. LaVine averaged 19 points per game in his first full season as a starter. Unfortunately, it would get cut short due to injury. And fast forward to the 2017 draft, the Wolves have the 7th pick, but instead of using it, they package it with Zach LaVine and Chris Dunn to land Jimmy Butler. Now, this trade in hindsight, given everything that happened that we'll get into, is egregious, especially because that pick ended up being Lauri Markkanen. But at the time, and even still kind of with hindsight a little bit, it's like, damn, a player like Jimmy Butler gets traded for, and a team that gets him only has to give up 1 first-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, you're like 13 years straight into missing the playoffs. Like, you got some nice young players, so you're not mortgaging your future completely. Yeah, you're only sending out 1 first-round pick. It makes complete sense, and the Timberwolves said, you know what? We're going to win now. We got Tibbs, we got some nice young players, we got Jimmy, we're gonna sign Jeff Teague, we're gonna pick up Taj Gibson. Even Jamal Crawford said, screw it, I'll go up to Minnesota and play there. So you know what? They were a very intriguing team in a very stacked Western Conference. And they had a great start to the season. They were 31-18 after beating the Clippers in late January, third in the Western Conference, and I was like pretty excited to see them in the playoffs, but it was a tough end of the season. They only finished 16-17. That was mostly thanks to Jimmy hurting his knee, and because of that, they fell all the way down to the A seed, and they played in like the OG play-in game, or like the play-in game before the play-in game. It was Nuggets Timberwolves, final game of the season to decide the A seed. They hung on, and they advanced to their first playoffs in 14 years.
And they got worked by the 2018 Rockets.
Yeah.
I mean, who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, I mean, no shame in that, 2018 Rockets.
None whatsoever. That's a great Rockets team. That summer, though, Jimmy was looking for an extension. He had only one season left on his deal, and apparently the Wolves only offered him a 4-year, $100 million deal. That's like KCP money now.
It is.
Also, it's like, what is it with franchises undervaluing Jimmy Butler? Like, the Wolves did it, the Sixers did it when they picked Tobias Harris over him, and now apparently Miami's doing it to him. Like, why does no one just want to pay Jimmy Butler?
I mean, I've heard the reputation he can be difficult to deal with,
But the man gets results.
yeah, he's Jimmy Butler. Pay this man up. And because of that, he was not happy going into next season. He requested a trade from the team, and then we got the infamous story during training camp where he wasn't even like participating. Apparently he was getting a massage or something, but then he heard it was scrimmage time. So he's like, you know what? I'm in there. I ain't playing with the starters. I'm playing with the third stringers. Whooped their ass and then left training camp screaming, you need me.
I would pay an unreasonable amount of money to be a fly on the wall in the practice facility that day and just see how it all went down. It sounds like comedic gold, honestly.
Yeah, TMZ, they leaked the Draymond punching Jordan Poole. We need them to leak this
They
too.
need to start working overtime to get this, if it exists.
He immediately followed that up, like immediately, literally right after. Apparently he went straight to Rachel Nichols to film that interview. So just so much chaos going on, and they still didn't trade him to start the season. They started 4-9 with him, but eventually they traded him to the 76ers for an all-time historic awful haul. Here's the haul. Jared Bayless, Robert Covington, Dario Saric, and a 2022 second-round pick.
I mean, Covington at the time was seen as like a decent 3-and-D player, but like Saric was a bust, Bayless was a guy, and again, a second round, that's just nothing right there.
Yeah, they actually did improve once he left. It kind of makes sense, like better chemistry. They go 15-12 in their next 27 games. Not a dramatic improvement, but you're still battling for playoff spot at that point. You're like 2 games out of the playoffs. And then they fired Tibbs. Kind of shocking, apparently, from what Woj reported, like the whole Jimmy situation was the beginning of the end. I mean, maybe in hindsight it worked out. They need to move on, but that was pretty shocking. And then Ryan Saunders gets promoted to be head coach. Finished the season 36-46. Just a awful season. You win 11 fewer games. I mean, you had some optimism when you acquired Jimmy. Like, you know, young team, add a superstar. They were going to be a contender in the Western Conference for years to come. Didn't work out whatsoever, and it quickly didn't work out.
Yeah, personalities of Jimmy Butler and Cat apparently just did not mesh whatsoever.
That offseason, the Timberwolves decided to trade up to take Jared Culver out of Texas Tech. Dude did nothing in the NBA. I only remember him from the national title game, Texas Tech versus Virginia, where he lost, but he showed out well enough to be the 6th pick. And this was an awful trade because they sent out Dario Saric and the 11th pick to the Suns, and that 11th pick would become Cam Johnson. So a horrible move, but let's give them major props because shortly after that, they signed undrafted free agent Naz Reid to a 2-way deal. Incredible move. Naz Reid, one of the best undrafted players in the entire NBA. He might be the best. I'd have to check a list.
And weirdly enough, like maybe the most popular guy on the roster among the fans. I know it's kind of a meme, but like Timberwolves fans love this guy.
I mean, even Tim Walz, the governor, tweeted out recently in the playoff run, like just Naz Reid. That's all you have to say.
Well, man secured the Wolves vote for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Now on to the regular season. The Wolves actually had a pretty solid start. Ryan Saunders remained on as head coach. They started out 10-8. They were playing more up-tempo. They were shooting more threes. But then in December, as young teams tend to do around this time of year, they just completely fell apart. They started the month on a 7-game losing streak. Cat got hurt and the streak got up to 11. A few months later, they went on a 13-game losing streak. And around this time, they decided it was finally time to move on from Maple Jordan. And they traded Wiggins to Golden State in exchange for D'Angelo Russell. Horrible trade in hindsight hindsight again because they send out a pick for some reason that would turn out to be Jonathan Kuminga.
Yeah, it's crazy that they've built such a good team because they've made a lot of really bad moves during this time. They've made a lot of really good moves, but some of these moves, like, damn, Kuminga on this team, I don't know if they'd be able to pay him. Like, I don't know how that would have worked out, but goddamn, he'd be a perfect fit.
While everyone's still on rookie deals, like the 1 or 2 years,
yeah,
it'd be phenomenal.
This season was the season they got cut short due to COVID-19. They finished the season 19-45, third worst record in the league, but Timberwolves fans do not care. They would have gone through this season 3 more times because they win the draft lottery and they end up taking Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. I was a big LaMelo guy at the time. I didn't know much about Anthony Edwards, but this was by far the right pick, the best pick, one of the best picks of the last 5 years or so, because outside of Wemby, I don't think anyone in the league has a brighter future than Anthony Edwards.
And to think there's probably a multiversal variant out there where Anthony Edwards is wearing a Warriors jersey.
Thank God.
I'm so glad I don't live in that universe. Shortly after draft night, the Warriors would also trade James Johnson and Poku to the Thunder in exchange for Jaden McDaniels and Ricky Rubio. Another great move because Jaden McDaniels has maybe become the best two-way player in the NBA at this point. He's a huge part of their perimeter defense going forward. They also made some other savvy moves like re-signing Malik Beasley. So just overall A++ offseason. You pick up your future star in Ant and you pick up one of the best perimeter defenders in the league in Jaden McDaniels. I mean, phenomenal offseason.
Unfortunately, though, in 2021, they still sucked. Ant showed some promise, Naz Reid showed some flashes in just his second year, but the team as a whole was super young and just didn't have the depth. They started the season 7-24, that prompted them to fire Ryan Saunders, and they replaced him with active assistant coach for the Raptors, Chris Finch. Not very often you see a active assistant coach get hired to be some other team's head coach. The last time that happened was Lionel Hollins in 2009, but great hire. Chris Finch has done a fantastic job of helping rebuild this team.
Gonna be real, I didn't even know you could do that.
I didn't really know you could either.
Makes the Bucks look even dumber for settling for Doc last year when you could have just gone and paid some assistant.
Yeah. They did slightly improve under Finch. Finished 23-49, but big problem though was they didn't have their first round pick. That was Kuminga going to the Warriors, so couldn't draft anyone, but they were still active. They trade Ricky Rubio of the Cavs for Taurean Prince, send out Jared Culver after just 2 seasons, also send out Hernan Gomez in the deal to get Pat Bev, and then they signed Jared Vanderbilt to a 3-year, $18 million deal. So not a bad offseason. You make some nice in-between moves, but again, Kuminga would have been really nice.
22 was the breakout year for the Wolves. So they had a rough start. They were 4-9 through their first 13 games, and they were only 16-20 through their first 36. But they picked it up. They went 31-16 in their last 47 games of the year. Towns was an all-star again, first time since 2019. Anthony Edwards improved on his rookie year. D'Lo was solid for them, and Pat Bev, weirdly enough, was the emotional and spiritual leader of the team. He really was. We just made that video hating on him, but this was one of his best years in the NBA. 146 games, had to play the Clippers in the play-in, won, and of course, celebrated like they solved world peace, like they cured cancer, ended world hunger. Again, not gonna hate on him too much because it's nice when athletes show emotion, but it is kind of funny.
It was just so funny. Anthony Edwards on the scoring table, Pat Bev on the scorers table,
crying.
But it was a great moment for the franchise because this finally felt like their arrival, like they were in the playoffs for the first time since 2019, only the second time since 2004. And in the playoffs, they showed that classic young team. They could have won this series against the Grizzlies looking back on it. They go up 1-0. Grizzlies respond. They win game 2 comfortably, so it's tied 1-1. But then in game 3, the Timberwolves, they blow multiple 20-point leads and they end up losing 104-95. Just classic young team. Respond to win game 4. Once again in game 5, they blow a lead. This wasn't as bad, but they were still up 13 points with under 10 minutes left in the 4th.
That's still pretty bad.
Yeah, Ja ends up hitting that game winner. And then in game 6, once again, you blow a double-digit lead. Don't want to be too critical. Young team. Chris Finch had done a great job of building them up, and it just happened. It's a young team. It's gonna happen. But they could have won this playoff series.
Yeah, shortly after the season, they hired Tim Connolly as president of basketball operations. He was the guy responsible for building the Nuggets into the juggernaut that they are today. So, pretty solid hire. And their first move of that offseason was the shocking trade where they landed Rudy Gobert. They sent out Pat Bev, Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, their first round pick, who ended up being Walker Kessler, 4 additional first round picks, and a pick swap. Now, the thing with this trade, 2 things can be true at once. 1, it's working so far, especially with where the Wolves are now, and we'll get into that in a second. But 2, I still think they overpaid for him. This is like that one purchase everyone's got, whether it's like a car or a boat, or hell, it could even be like a really nice shirt, really nice suit or whatever. Like, you love it, you use it a lot, it's one of your favorite things you have, but you do look at it and you're like, probably overpaid for it.
Like, we get the logic, Cat, he's big enough to be a center, he's got the body of a center, but he plays more like a 4. He likes to shoot threes. He's not a fantastic rim protector, although he played very well in the playoffs against Jokic, but he's more of a guy you stick on a big, not a rim protector. So you get the logic, but goddamn, it was a huge overpay, and it basically prevented them from making any other major move in the future. They did also sign Kyle Anderson that offseason, so regardless of how you felt about the trade at the time, a lot of people thought it was an awful move, and I think that's kind of where we were at the time too.
Oh, it certainly was where I was at. I thought it was the worst trade in NBA history.
Yeah, it was a very intriguing team going into next season. Unfortunately, though, they did not start how they wanted to. I mean, obviously, there was going to be an adjustment with Rudy Gobert, but you start just 5-8. After the first 8 games, Anthony Edwards hadn't had a dunk, and when he was asked about it, he was just like, everyone's in the paint.
It's not wrong.
Yeah, it wasn't wrong.
Gobert's not a shooter. He's a lot of things. Shooter ain't one of them.
And it didn't help that after 21 games, Cat gets injured, so you're down your second best player. He didn't return till late March.
You're down the guy who's supposed to draw people out of the paint.
Exactly. And they hovered around 500, which, that's gonna happen without your second best player. And then the D'Lo experiment would finally end. In February, they send him out in a 3-team deal that nets them back Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Great trade.
Yeah, Conley's just a better D'Lo.
Yeah. I mean, he's just a much better fit. Like, he's a guy who doesn't need the ball all the time. He can hit an open 3-pointer. I guess D'Lo can too, but he's a much better defender. That's the main.
He's a much more consistent player too.
Exactly.
Cat would finally return to the team though at the end of the year. He played in 8 of the final 9 games this season, and the Wolves would go 6-3 in those final 9, heading into the playoffs. Finished 42-40, got them the 8th seed, had to play the Lakers in the play-in, which they would lose, but they blew out the Thunder in the second play-in game. Got the Nuggets in the first round, and they'd be taken out in 5, which, that's tough, but the one bright spot from this series was how well Anthony Edwards played. He averaged 31 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, had some absolutely monster games. 41 points in game 2, 36 in game 3, 34 in game 4, including a clutch-ass jumper to help them avoid elimination. And in game 5, he had a potential game-tying 3 that would have sent the game into overtime, but he just missed it long. So, obviously a disappointing year overall, but Ant's performance in the playoffs, I think, definitely had people excited going into next season.
Yeah, and especially what he did in FIBA over the summer. Like, it was looking like Anthony Edwards was going to take that top 10 player, leap next season, and he definitely did that. During that offseason, though, they didn't really do much because they had no picks to work with. But like many people predicted, Ant took that leap to become a top 10 player, at least very close to a top 10 player. And overall, with a full season together, add Mike Conley for an entire year, you got Gobert for the entire offseason, everything, they had a record start. They start 11-3, best start in franchise history. They extend that to 17-4 after a win over the Grizzlies in early December, and their defense was crazy dominant. And I guess that's why you go out and get a guy like Gobert. They had by far the best defense in the entire NBA. And a lot of people were saying, this is the best defense in modern NBA history.
I mean, considering that, offensive scoring output is at or close to an all-time high in the modern NBA, the fact that the Wolves were putting up such great defensive numbers against all these teams in the modern NBA, I don't know if I'll quite go best defense of all time, because I don't know if anything is going to beat the 04 Pistons in my mind, but man, they were good.
Towns is healthy again. He returns to the All-Star game. Anthony Edwards, he joins him in the All-Star game. Gobert, Defensive Player of the Year, 4th time he's done that. Only 2 other players, Dikembe Mutombo and Ben Wallace, have also done that. Naz Reid, fantastic off the bench, 6th man of the year. Jaden McDaniels, breakout season, and became that 2-way stopper like we talked about. And they were battling for the 1st seed all season long. They just narrowly missed out and got the 3rd seed, matching them up with the Suns in the 1st round, but they just dominated the Suns.
Bodied them when we both picked Phoenix because we were just holding on to the ghosts of, they got KD and Booker and maybe Bradley Beal will figure it out. No, they did not.
Anthony Edwards capped things off with that monster dunk on Kevin Durant. And then they take out the defending champs in 7 on the road. And I gotta mention, it was poetic to see a team 2 years ago that was blowing 20-point leads in the playoffs come back and beat the defending champions in Denver. Just incredible to see. Unfortunately, though, Luka would end the fun in the conference finals, but this has to be what, their second best season in franchise history?
Yeah, I think 04 is still probably better. They won more games in the regular season. They won more games in the conference finals against probably a better team in the conference finals. That 04 Lakers team with Kobe and Shaq, you know. But I mean, still, considering where like they've been for the past 15, 20 years, like phenomenal season, incredible season. High expectations for next year, though.
Yeah, and let's briefly talk about next season to wrap things up. Didn't have a lot of flexibility this offseason, but they're like, you know what, screw it. We're sending out more picks. They traded a future first and a future swap for Rob Dillingham. I like the move. I mean, he's a nice young scorer, has a ton of upside from what I've seen, and can kind of slot in to be that future point guard in the future. Doesn't really play like Mike Conley from what I know, like he's more of just a scoring guard, but they don't necessarily need another defender. They could use a nice young scoring guard who can put up buckets. So I like that. You give Chris Finch a new long-term deal, and you lose a guy like Kyle Anderson, like that hurts. You bring in Joe Ingles. I'm not sure how much more he's got left in the tank, but
he'll piss someone off in the playoffs. He'll bait someone into getting a technical foul.
Yeah, but really, if you're the Timberwolves, it's all on like, how far can Anthony Edwards take this team? So what do you guys think? Are the Timberwolves poised to capture their first title in franchise history here soon? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and hey, while you're here, check out some of our other content as well. And don't forget to subscribe to Synthetic Sports.